What is up, my bloomin' nerds? Okay, I'm gonna proceed with reading the book because deadline's getting closer. It's bad. And I have music this time because I was dying last time. So I'm just gonna get right into it. Left off on page 13. Pretty sure we left off right down at the bottom. Turn that, just tap. Okay, Jean returned to Gulfport and worked at the Ramada Inn and the Downtowner. I worked the breakfast and lunch shifts, she recalled, until 2 p.m. Then I went home and fixed dinner for the kids, did some laundry, took a nap. After that I went back in the evening to work banquets. Jean kept that grueling routine for years, but she didn't remember it as being that hard. The cops used to toot their horns at me and wave, she said with a laugh. I just knew everybody there. All of us girls who worked at the Round Towner called ourselves Hank Schrader's Raiders, after the man who owned the restaurant. Down at the Broadwater Beach, the piano player always stopped whatever he was playing when she walked in. He'd change over to Jean. Jean, you're young and alive. Come out in the meadow, Jean, when he saw me. She remembered smiling. She met Don Smith at Keesler Air Force Base. Jean had never really dated anyone except military men, and the third man in her life was no exception. Like Frank Walsh, Don was an Air Force fighter pilot. He flew 254 missions in Vietnam in his Navy Sky Raider. But Don Smith was about as opposite as a man could be from Frank Walsh. All the two men had in common was their short statures, and their service careers. Don had raised 2 stepdaughters, and he had a son and a daughter of his own. He was as steady as a rock. He was always there when Jean needed him, and that meant a lot to her. He loved her absolutely. Despite 5 children and the struggle to raise them, Jean was a very lovely young woman. She was still slender then, and as pretty as her daughters were. Don Smith welcomed Danny, Donnie, Kathy, Sheila, and Carrie, too. And he took on the role of a father happily. Unprofessional of me, I'm so sorry. He was a little tougher on discipline than Frank was, but his conservative approach made the kids mind better. Jean dated Don Smith for 2.5 years, always warning him that she would never again marry a serviceman. If he wanted to marry her, he would have to retire from the Air Force. Don agreed, Carrie said later. He was in the midst of retiring, and she was planning to marry him. I think she had gotten used to being taken care of and cherished. I called Don my dad, and my biological father my father. Don is the one who raised me, and the one I depended on. Don took Carrie with him to get the marriage license in Pascagoula, and he and Jean were married on the base at Keesler on February 4th, 1972. Frank remarried a woman named Barbara, but he still kept in touch with his girls. To Jean's chagrin when she found out he took Carrie to be baptized Catholic without her mother's permission. Jean and Don Smith, now retired from the Air Force, moved with their combined family to Chandler, Arizona, where Don realized his longtime dream of having a peach-colored orchard. Peach orchard. Long-time dream of having a peach orchard. Don had grown up in Arizona and his parents were there. Jean hated the Southwest and the baking heat. She often said, "I know I'll never go to hell because I've already lived through hell right here in Arizona." They went to the Mormon church, but Carrie ignored her runaway Catholic baptism and got on a bus gathering of youngsters for day camp at the Baptist church. "I loved it," she said, laughing. "I hated the Mormon church." Despite her fretting about the Arizona weather, Jean had made a wise decision when she married Don, for many reasons. She loved Don, of course, but even if she had stayed with Frank, she would not have been with him long. He started his last tour of duty in Vietnam on July 21st, 1972. 5 months later, his fighter plane was shot down. It was 2 days before Christmas. Sheila probably would remember more about when our father was missing in action, Carrie said. "All I remember is that some men in uniform came to our house after dark and that my mother was crying. I wet the bed that night, and I hadn't wet the bed for a long time." There were already a number of casualties in his unit when Frank Walsh was shot down as he banked low to wipe out an enemy anti-aircraft site. All they ever found of him were 2 teeth and his scorched flight card, and that was a long time later. His service number was 049303910, and his status became killed in hostile action, died while missing. Long before that. He was only 32 when he died. Both Sheila and Carrie took his death hard. Jean was distraught. It was something she had always feared, of course. In a sense, she felt widowed rather than divorced from Frank Walsh. That feeling vanished when she received a letter from the Asian woman on Okinawa who told Jean that she had been Frank's mistress for many years, since long before their divorce. It was a cruel thing for the woman to do. It could not have eased her own sense of loss, and it hurt Jean. Even so, when there was a memorial service for Francis Anthony Walsh, Jean sewed identical long pink dresses for Kathy, Sheila, and Carrie to wear with white shoes for the service. They posed for Don Smith's camera, their faces solemn, next to the White House the Smiths were renting in Chandler, shadows from rose bushes and trees dappling their dresses. Jean's marriage to Don thrived. He was 7 years older than she was, and he doted on her. No matter how down she got or how anxious, Don took it in stride. He was a good provider. He was a skilled architectural draftsman working for an Arizona construction company, as well as tending his flourishing orchard. Now Jean finally had a chance to do her sewing and work on the crafts she enjoyed so much, and for a while she had such talent. A few years later, the Smiths moved north, to Salem, Oregon. Don's boss had moved up to head Forest Homes out of Woodburn. The building business was blooming in the Northwest, and his boss persuaded Don to transfer with him. With Gene so unhappy in Arizona, it didn't take much to get Don to accept the new job. Even though Don and Gene were both used to the peripatetic, I don't know how to say the word, just go with it, service life, moving from the dry heat of Arizona to the soft gray rain that suffuses Oregon for much of the year was a tremendous change. Still, they liked Oregon, and the construction future there looked bright. Don had his Air Force pension to add to his salary, and they were doing fine. In 1997, he started his own construction business, Alpha Bravo Construction. Salem is the capital of Oregon. Okay. Yeah, sorry. It is, though. I knew that one. That's one of the few capitals I know. I don't know a lot of capitals. We learned that in 4th grade, okay? That's so long ago. Salem is the capital of Oregon, watched over by a towering gold statue of a pioneer on the top of the Capitol building. Set in the heart of the fertile Willamette Valley, Salem and Marion County produce bumper crops of cherries, strawberries, green beans, and roses. Roses line the parking strips, blooming from April until Christmas, but the skies are predominantly cloudy and the rainy season is long and dreary. Kathy, Sheila, and Carrie acclimated quickly. They attended school in Salem. Aside from visits to their Mississippi relatives, they never expected to leave Oregon. A few years later, in the dark days of autumn 1978, Gene was to lose another child in November. As Donnie moved through his teen years, his behavior changed imperceptibly. When he was 16, he went camping alone in the Arizona hills and came home deathly sick from something doctors could diagnose only as similar to Lyme disease. Maybe his illness was causative, or maybe it was only coincidental, but he was different somehow after that. Moody and distant. More likely he had inherited his father's manic depression. When Donnie ran away from home, Don and one of Donnie's paternal uncles agreed that it would be a good idea for him to go into the army. So Donnie enlisted and was sent to boot camp at Fort Lewis, south of Tacoma, Washington. Okay, in case you didn't know, Tacoma is like the outskirts of Seattle. Got you. The men in the family were sure that the service would make a man of Donnie, but instead it did terrible things to his psyche. Donnie was already weak, and Gene would refer to before he got sick and after he got sick. Relatives recalled that he had a chemical imbalance just like his father. When he was emotionally and physically abused by one of his commanding officers, Donnie began to crack. He self-medicated with drugs and, unknown to anyone, built a homemade bomb. Donnie was suicidal. The struggle of liking music so much. Always reminded. Donnie was suicidal. He was stopped while driving erratically, and the bomb was found in his truck. His uncle, Jack Smith, who worked at Boeing in Seattle, went down to Fort Lewis to see what he could do to help Donnie, and it was obvious to everyone that the boy didn't belong in the army. He was released on a Section 8 unsuitable. No. He was released on a Section 8 and declared unsuitable for service. He headed back to Arizona far more disturbed than he had been before he enlisted. It was the day before Thanksgiving, 1978, Carrie said. Donnie rode his bicycle more than 20 miles to the VA hospital closest to Scottsdale. They said they had no resources to treat him, and they sent him away. Donnie Anderson was 21 years old, depressed and anxious. The day after Thanksgiving, his brother, Danny, came home to the apartment they shared in Scottsdale and found Donnie dead of a gunshot wound. Jean had now lost 2 children during the month of November. She began to dread the 11th month. First her baby girl, and now her beloved, dark-haired, brown-eyed son, both gone just as winter began. My mother just kind of shut down somehow after Donnie died, Carrie said. Sheila Walsh went to Sprague High School in Salem. If you go to that high school and I said it wrong, I'm sorry. Taking college prep courses. She had seen her mother work double shifts as a waitress, and she vowed to get an education so that she would always have something she could count on. Sheila asked a good-looking student to be her science partner, and he accepted, readily. Science happened to be my worst subject. I feel ya, Sheila. Rick Bladorn said, and Sheila was smart. I was relieved when she chose me. Oh no, this isn't gonna be good. Sheila got excellent grades, and she was named to the National Honor Society. I'm in that. She and Rick had known each other for 3 years before her little sister Carrie met him. They had already graduated when Carrie met Rick. She didn't approve of the man Sheila was dating at the time, and set about playing Cupid, a role she was ill-suited for. Never subtle, Carrie's intent was transparent, and Sheila realized what she was up to right away. Rick was tall and handsome, but most important, he was a really nice guy. Not goody-goody nice, but basically decent. When Carrie chose him for Sheila, she was sure she could. When Carrie chose him for Sheila, she was sure she could convince her sister, with enough hints and careful choreographed meetings, that Rick was the perfect man for her. Although they were good friends, there never was any spark between Rick and Sheila. Unfortunately for Carrie's plan, Sheila wasn't the least bit interested in Rick. She preferred to date men who had a bit of danger about them. Rick didn't feel any particular attraction to Sheila either. Both of them thought it was humorous that 13-year-old Carrie was so determined to look after her big sister that she tried to select her future husband. A few years later, it was Carrie who went to a party at the house where Rick lived with a couple of other young men. She was initially attracted to Rick's roommates. She would have wagered good money that she would never fall in love with Rick. Okay. I'm gonna stop it there because I'm trying to make shorter videos, so then, ads aren't like too crazy. And last thing you want is to see someone read a book for an hour, especially with the struggling of reading. Okay, so it is the end of the video. You can subscribe, you can like it, or even dislike this video. I won't take it personally. Okay. It's the end of the video. You know what that means. I'm gonna do a little awkward dance. This isn't our dance, it's just me being dorky. Okay, but seriously, end of video. PCs, goodbye nerds.